Now, to discuss this issue with us and the issue of terrorism really spreading across Europe, we're joined by political expert Chris Bambery on Skype. Chris, thank you very much for joining the bulletin. Firstly, from what we've seen over the past 2 weeks, there's clearly an imminent security threat with police raids popping up in different cities. What, in your opinion, is the exact cause of this problem? I mean, the root of it all?
The root of it all, I think, lies in two factors. First, it's obviously the reaction which followed the so-called war on terror being declared by the United States and the European governments after the 9/11 attack. If you remember, Tony Blair was warned by MI5 prior to the invasion that homegrown terrorism, homegrown terrorism would be a consequence of this attack inevitably. Now, MI5 were right in warning Blair about that, and we've seen that. Now, luckily in Britain, the number of attacks have been relatively few. I mean, dreadful as they are, relatively few. We're now seeing as well the return of these jihadis, which I find strange that they are allowed to return so easily, because after all, Western intelligence services track them so effectively en route to Syria and Iraq, and often were involved in helping train and arm them. But the return of these people, and you have to ask in many ways, this is a policy of Britain, France, Belgium, etc., coming to us, because we built up the armed opposition in Syria and encouraged these groups.
Chris, before we enter discussion about foreign policy, I just want to say, are we going to be seeing more raids across Europe over the next couple of weeks?
Yes, I think we are. And I think it's unfortunate, but if you remember as well, in the wake of 9/11, the rush to bring these people to retribution often led to very bad mistakes, which has only fueled the problem. I mean, Guantanamo Bay actually stands as a reminder of that, and it's not a wonder, I think, that many of those who were detained in Guantanamo Bay were radicalized as a result. I think you and me would be radicalized as a consequence of being in Guantanamo Bay when you hear about, for instance, the treatment of Sheikh Ahmad, the last Brit to be there. But also at a much lower level. I mean, in the area of London I'm sitting, 9/11 was followed by a huge spike in stop and search for young North Africans in this area. And many of those, as a consequence of their treatment at the hands of the police, became further alienated. Added to all this, particularly in France, but actually in other places in Europe as well, we have to talk about the segregation which exists, the racism which exists, and the fact that many young Muslims from North Africa feel excluded from France, not because of their choice, but because there has been a systematic racism which has held them back over the years. And indeed, France's inability to deal with the fallout from the Algerian War of Independence nearly half a century ago. And we've seen the rise of the Front National in France, I mean, a virulently racist organization, adding to that sense of alienation. Now, if we want to deal with this problem, particularly in France and other European countries like Germany, I think we have to deal with the sort of segregation and racism which exists there and is holding people back and leading to poverty, unemployment, the fact that Muslims make up such a high percentage of France's jail population. All of these are issues which need to be addressed, but aren't really being addressed in the wake of the Paris killings.
Now, moving on from France and going to Europe on a general sense, do you think it's the foreign policy of certain leading countries in Europe that plays a major factor in the presence of militants across Europe?
I think foreign policy, and I have to add in immigration policy, because what we are seeing is a huge tide of anti-immigrant sentiments, which affects many Muslims, obviously. But foreign policy is a continuing issue. I mean, if you're sitting in Britain and France or in Germany, you must be wondering why Benjamin Netanyahu was on that march last Sunday in Paris, showing unity. I mean, terrible as the events in Paris were, they pale in comparison to what was unleashed by Netanyahu in Gaza. And of course, the Western governments, like David Cameron's here in Britain, supported Israel full 100% in that war on Gaza, leading to an alienation from that. And we have a catalogue of instances, whether it's from the big operations like the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, the bombing of Libya, or the smaller ongoing things like the drone attacks, which we see as a constant reminder in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, Yemen, Mali, Somalia, and elsewhere, and also I think a sense of hypocrisy. I mean, Frank Holland was right in your package to say that Muslims are the main people dying at the hands of ISIS and these organizations, and yet in the week and a half since the Paris killings, despite the fact there have been many more killed in Nigeria, in Iraq and Syria by these Salafist Takfiri groups, the media attention is on Paris, where rightly terrible events, but 17 people died, whereas the body count in Iraq is far greater. And yet the focus is much less on that. The body count in Nigeria is far greater, and yet the focus is less on that. And there is a sense that really a brown or a black life counts for rather less in this world than a white life.
Okay, we're just going to have to leave it there. Political expert Chris Bambery, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.